9/11 completely changed my world. See, I remember when it happened. Um, I also remember looking in the sky and seeing for the first time in my life absolutely no planes. Yeah, the Twin Towers, and I clearly remember what happened. And this video is a way for me to talk about it and compare it, at least the activities of greatness that happened in that day, to something that I love, right? So this is in remembrance to those that lost their lives, for those who served that day, whether it was at the Pentagon in New York or those that took the flight down. For those that are still impacted by this today, I'm going to talk about remembrance and resilience, agile values, and 9/11. But before we do that, let's just take a moment of silence. Hit the intro. The events of 9/11 had a profound, lasting impact on society, not just American society, but society across the world. When you think about politics, when you think about the relationships that we had, international relationships, when you think about people's individual perspectives on the value of life, um, and the humanity of people, right? The humanity of people. Um, you think about the chaos that happened, right? That immediate chaos that happened on that day, and really the long term impacts on you know core values of individuals, on the nation itself. Um, you know, these things really truly resonate with the agile methods, the agile manifesto in particular, and the values that many of us espouse to live by. So when you juxtapose the agile values, um, and 9/11, and you think about the resilience, the adaptation, um, the courage that people had on that day, um, we can take a deeper look at the beauty in humanity, really. And so I don't want this to be taken, about such a tragic topic, and compare it to work, right? I really want to talk about how I see the agile values in comparison with the crisis that happened at that time. Okay, I'm going to start off with the first value that's listed on the Agile Manifesto, and it is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And I think this one is really a super easy one, when I think about 9/11. Um, let's say valuing human, the human interactions and those human relationships over the strict adherence that people could have had in relationships to, um, tools that they utilized, procedures, policies, and thinking about that over that stuff, right? When you look at the parallel to 9/11, you see a few things that's really super important. Probably the first thing that I see when I think about valuing human interaction and those relationships is the heroism that was shown, the collaboration that existed amongst the people, especially what you've seen in New York, right? And then there was a unity that happened, right? When you think about specifically the first responders, the volunteers, and regular citizens, right? Just ordinary, ordinary citizens. There was such pride in seeing people in New York pull together, right? There was nothing like being a New Yorker, and I'm from Chicago, and just people that I know from New York, that kind of way that they pulled together as one. I never seen anything like that in my life, right? It really highlighted the importance of that human connection, of those human relationships, of us being Americans, right? It kind of pulled that together, right? And what we forgot about, like we do in any emergency, we forget about the hierarchies that exist, the protocols that exist. Yeah, we use some of that stuff, right, to make sure that we can get things done. But we don't let it be the thing that gets in our way, right? And that collective spirit that we saw on that day, the sacrifices that people made, from people's lives, um, to even the people supporting the first responders, right? Those families that were impacted. Um, it took us and gave us the opportunity to have a truly immediate response to the tragedy. And so I definitely see how human interaction and relationships was looked at way more than any processes and tools, right? How about the second value that's on the list, right? The Agile Manifesto second value is working software over comprehensive documentation. Let's remove the working software part because we know that this thing started in software, but let's just say working solutions. Working solutions, working services. Let's use that instead. So, working solutions over comprehensive documentation. How would I phrase that up? Um, I think about delivering functional solutions that worked in those moments, taking precedence over exhaustive documentation, right? And when I think about this in context of 9/11, right, I think about the crisis, the unprecedented crisis, right? The need for immediate, actionable solutions were critical in the situation. Whether it was rescuing as many survivors as possible, adjusting as things started to collapse, thinking about after the World Trade Centers collapse, thinking about going through the wreckage, the dedication for that, and the types of things that needed to be pulled in to get that done. Makeshift medical camps, the emphasis on immediate, effective action is probably the thing that stood out to me more than anything else. And we value that action, even though we we value those solutions, even though we know that those other things exist, the documentation exists. So working solutions was one of the biggest things that needed to happen in that moment of crisis, right? The third thing, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, right? A super important one that exists in terms of Agile. Now, if I was to take that and think about it in terms of this situation, I would probably rephrase that to say engage and collaborate with those in need, the user, um, and when I say the user, I mean those who needed the services, those who needed the solutions, right? Those who had a need, right? Um, Rather than getting trapped in the contractual details of what's right and wrong by any standard, right? When I think about this from a 9/11 perspective, there was an absolute uh, collective, completely collective um, response by society that really went above and beyond the politics, the bureaucracy, the administrative load that classically exists within any government entities that are trying to work to get things done, right? We can deal with the fallout later. We can find ways to deal with those contracts later. But right now, let's do what we need to do to serve the people that are in need, right? And let's collaborate in a way to best meet those needs, right? Let's engage them where they are at, and let's try to turn this tragedy into a a movement characterized by the spirit of us as a people, right? And so I take that and think to myself, this nation, right? This nation, America, we um, we found ways to collaborate. Um, we found ways to get things done without all the formalities, right? Without all, we got to check every single box in order to get it done. Whether it was aid, or any other kind of support, right? We made sure that the resources were available. We made sure that we made sure the resources were shared based on the needs of those in need, the user, the customer, right? Rather than sitting up here trying to negotiate anything, right? So you saw the spirit of that on 9/11. The last one, I said the first one was super easy, but the last one is, I guess, it's probably easier than the first one, right? Because the last value is responding to change over following a plan, right? This for me is about being adaptive and flexible to change rather than adhering to some rigid plan. Now, I can only imagine that the every single department that was involved in a rescue efforts, for example, has protocols for almost anything that could possibly happen. But how the heck do you plan for that? I mean, how the heck do you really plan for that, right? Um, I just don't know how you truly plan for that one. That's a different place to be, and it just is interesting, right? Because there's no way to plan for that. Even with the best laid plans for that, you still had a situation where it probably exceeded anybody's expectations or anybody's ability to plan, right? So here's the deal: 9/11 was something that could not be fully anticipated, regardless, right? It just couldn't be, right? So I think all those plans had to change. Every plan that we had to change, right? You saw, people changing those plans along the way. The entire world had to react to whatever it was, what was going down, real time, right? And I just remember looking in the sky and seeing no planes at all. Every flight being grounded, right? And I'm from Chicago. I was in Chicago, and that fear of a plane hitting the Sears Tower, what's called the Willis Tower now for some strange, well, I'm not gonna say for some strange reason, but it's called the Willis Tower now. But we call it the Sears Tower. I mean, thinking about a plane hitting the Sears Tower, it, I understand. I understand, right? In terms of World Trade Centers, right? So the ability to get everybody to enact various emergency protocols, right? The ability to change as a nation was paramount, right? And we won't talk about the response that we did in terms of military overseas or anything like that. I just really want to stay focused on that day and the things that happened that day and how we as a nation kind of became one, right? And change was a major part of that, right? Because I don't think there's any plan that we could have made that really would have prepared us for that, right? All the smaller plans probably put together helped out, but real time is what happened. Real time change, right? So that's that fourth principle, right? I think each one of the values, or values, I said principles, each one of the values are extremely helpful, were extremely helpful that day, even though we don't think about it in that way. You know, the Agile Manifesto's values is really about culture. And in this culture, it was a culture of a nation coming together as one. And when I look at the tragic events of 9/11, right? I look at the aftermath. For me, it showcased resilience, our unity, the ability to adapt, right? And just a collective strength, right? That we had, right? Um, Agile focuses on this thing. And even though we talk about this or we deal with this from a software development perspective, Agile is really, it really emphasizes human connections, flexibility, tangible outcomes. And I think that all those things parallel to what we saw on 9/11. So I dedicate this to those who lost their lives, those who were impacted near and far by this tragedy. And it's something I will never, it changed my life. It really did.